So got that. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right.
Go from there.
So I'm Mike Shea, and I'm going to be doing a presentation on beginning Photoshop. I can't see chat messages, but Mike over here is going to be monitoring those. So if you have a question during the presentation, put it into the chat, and Mike will relay it to me, and we'll get you an answer, I hope. So what I'm going to be talking about is basically Photoshop. But before I begin, I just want to mention that when you subscribe to Photoshop, you also have a subscription for Adobe Bridge and Camera Raw and Room. And last year, I did a presentation called Beginning Intermediate Photoshop. That was on the November 2021 workshop. And I spent quite a bit of time talking about Bridge and Camera Raw. So if you're not familiar with those programs, you might want to look at that video to become familiar, because they're both valuable things to know if you're going to use Photoshop. So the
Mike?
version of Photoshop,
Yeah, what's that?
Mike, are you taking questions?
what can you repeat that?
Go ahead.
This is Bob Brandstrom. I've heard of those other two programs. I have no idea why anyone would use them or what they're for. Can you give like a 1-minute explanation of when you might want to use those?
Yeah, so sure. So Adobe Bridge is an organizational program. I will bring it up real quick. You can see what it looks like. It's a very I find it a very valuable program to organize your photos. Like I say, if it'd be a good thing to look at that video from last year, because I don't have the time today to go into it, but it's a great program. I use it all the time. It's got so many features. It's unbelievable in my opinion. Camera Raw is, if you shoot in your camera's RAW format, you will have to open those pictures in Adobe Camera Raw to use Photoshop. And again, it's also a very powerful, useful tool. And so let's see, I will open, I think I have one.
For basic development, right? Camera Raw is for basic development.
Yeah, so I got one Photoshop document. So this is what over here. Oh, no, wait, that's not a raw document. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, if I go open and I pick a raw document, it's going to start opening now, and you'll see what Camera Raw looks like. So this is what Camera Raw looks like. And there's all these options to adjust exposure, whatnot. Again, it's just something really useful. And if you want to get more information about it, check out that video from last year. But if you use Photoshop, I recommend you also try Bridge, and you will automatically use Camera Raw if you're opening a RAW file.
Okay, thank you.
We get rid of that.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Boy.
Right here, cancel all these changes out of that. And then this thing.
Boy, I don't know where.
Select, that's in your menu. Click on one of those items.
Oops. Okay. All right. So getting back. So my presentation is going to cover 3 areas. The first one is going to be how to initially set up Photoshop. The second area is going to be to go over the menus, the tools, and the panels that you would use as a beginning Photoshop user. And then we're going to actually open up a few photos and do some basic adjustments. So first off, to tell what version of Photoshop you're using, you go to the Help menu up here and click System Information. And here it gives you a whole bunch of information about the version. And at the very top, it's telling you that I'm using version 24.0.0, which is the most current version, also called Photoshop 2023. So that's the one I'll be using. And if you haven't upgraded, I want to point out that every time Photoshop upgrades, they include, everything gets better with it, but it also uses more computer resources. So, keep that in mind. If you've got an older computer and you start updating Photoshop, eventually you run out of, well, let me speak for myself. Eventually I ran out of space. I had to buy a new computer to give me enough memory and disk space to use Photoshop successfully. So what we're seeing here is the basic Photoshop screen. And what I'm going to do now is go through what the different components are called. So up at the top here, you've got the menus. So I'm putting my cursor across it. Those are menus. These are tools, where I'm running my cursor up and down along the tools. These things over here are called panels. They're also called tabs, and they're also called windows. It depends on where in Photoshop you look for them. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go through and I'm going to tell you what I think you should do when you're starting to use Photoshop. Now, if you're using Photoshop currently and you haven't done this, something you might want to consider. So the first thing we're going to do is go up to the edit menu and we're going to set our color settings. So right here, color settings. And there are two color settings I would recommend you use. The first one would either be North American General Purpose 2. And as you can see, the color profile here is sRGB. The other one you might want to use is North America Pre-Press 2 over here, where your working color space is Adobe RGB. So I use the Adobe RGB. I'm going to show you why. Okay, so here's a color profile chart showing you all the different colors, and you can see the outside line, which covers more of the colors, is the Adobe RGB color space, and this inner line is the sRGB color space. So that tells you that Adobe RGB can pick up more colors than sRGB.
This is Adobe RGB in 1998, so that's the last version.
Okay, so the question was, it says Adobe RGB 1998, and it was at the last version, and that's correct. That's the last version of the Adobe RGB color space. So a couple things about color spaces. One, most computer monitors will only read the sRGB colors. So if you have the broader color space, you're not going to get all those colors on a monitor. The other thing is, if you're going to a commercial printer, most commercial printers are only going to use the sRGB color space. So, it's kind of like you take your pick. I think the most critical thing here is that you have your camera set for whatever color space you set in Photoshop. So I polled several of the members here at the Camera Club, and most of them used Adobe RGB color space in their camera and Adobe RGB color space when they're working in Photoshop. A couple used sRGB in both places. What you don't want to do is you don't want to set your camera for sRGB and Photoshop for Adobe RGB, because you can't go up. You can always go from Adobe RGB down to sRGB, but you can't go the other way around. So just make sure that whatever color space you use for Photoshop, you also use for your camera. Now, the other thing about color spaces is these items down here. It says profile mismatches, missing profiles, and ask when pasting. So if you have, let's say you have the Adobe RGB color space selected. So I'll go back up and we'll select that. And I open a document. You see how these are all checked here? These are all checked. And let's say if I open a document that's in the sRGB color space, I'm going to get an error message, or not an error message. I'm going to get a message telling me that the color space is different. So if you're getting these things and you don't want them, just click these off. The only one I keep clicked is missing profiles, because I'll want to assign a color profile to that. Okay, so that's the first thing we're going to do, is set up our color space. The next thing we're going to do is set up our preferences, which are on the edit menu. So I'm going to go down here at the very bottom, preferences. And I'll start up here at general. And you'll see there's going to be a bunch of items over on the left here that you can set. Now, you don't need to set them all. The ones that I think are most critical are, is our file handling. you've got this space spot here. It says maximize PSD and PSB file compatibility. Now I've got never checked. And in the handout that I gave you, I said, I recommend never. Now I going to put a caveat on that, that if you use Lightroom, you are going to have to put always, because Lightroom will not be able to read these files unless they have been unless they're compatible with Photoshop. So if you use Lightroom, you check always. If you don't use Lightroom, you can check never. And basically what this does is, it's if you take a current Photoshop file and you try to open it in an older version of Photoshop, if you haven't checked always here, it won't read in the older version. But it's like, how many of us are going to use an old version of Photoshop to work on a new file? Probably none of us. So that's why I check never. The other thing we want to look at is export. Now, the default for Photoshop is PNG file format, but I'm going to change that to JPEG. So I'm changing it here, and here you can do your quality. I'm going to put my quality at 5 because when I'm making a JPEG, generally I'm going to make it for the web. If you're going to have it printed, you want a higher quality. You want to go all the way as high as you can there. So you want to change that to JPEG. You want to set your quality, and down here, quick export color space, because if you put it on the web, it only read sRGB. So I'm going to say, I'm going to have this checked, convert to sRGB. The other thing we want to look at is the performance tab here. Now, if you've got a computer that has a lot of memory, you might want to increase how much memory Photoshop uses, but it's recommended you never use more than 85% of your computer's memory for Photoshop, because you still have other computer processes that have to run, and you don't want to, use too much of it for Photoshop. And then the last thing we're going to look at is scratch disk. So scratch disk is a place where Photoshop puts files. When it runs out of memory to do something, it puts that information on a hard drive and uses that hard drive kind of like additional memory. So you want to use the fastest drive you have on your computer that you have space on, because these files that end up there can get quite large. If you're working on one Photoshop file and you keep adding layers to it, it takes up a lot of space. And also, if you want to use an internal drive, not a thumb drive, you do not want to use a thumb drive as your scratch disk. And generally, the default scratch disk is going to be your main computer drive here. But you can see on mine, I have my D drive checked rather than my C drive. That's just the way I have mine set up. You can, if you have a lot of space on your C drive and you don't need to worry about it, check your C drive. But this is an older computer. On my current computer, I have my C drive checked, but this is an older computer. I'm using my D drive. So those are the things on the Edit Preferences menu you want to take a look at. Now, the next thing on the set, when you're setting it up, we're going to go to Windows, the Windows menu. And we're going to look at Workspace. Now, what I'm showing here on the screen is the default workspace. There are several other workspaces here. There's one called Photography. You can see it opens up these other windows here. I'm just going to go through a couple of them. So you can see they're all changed. What I've done is I've made my own workspace. I call it Mike's. So these are the items that I use the most. So I created my custom workspace. So you can all do that on your own computers. These different windows that you see here are all from the Windows menu. So if I click off channels, I click off history, they all disappear. Now I'm going to put them back because I use them. The other thing I want to point out, because if you let's watch what happens. Boom, they're all gone. If you accidentally hit your tab key, they all go away. If you hit your tab key again, they come back. So if you ever lose all your windows that are open, just hit your tab key and see if that's what created the problem. I would say when you're working, you're probably always going to want to have the options bar. Watch what happens when I click off the options bar at the top of the screen right here. I click that off and you lose that. So you're probably always going to want, if I click tools off, you lose the tools over here. So you're probably always going to want to have options and tools checked, but that's up to you. It's whatever you want to do. Okay, so that's setting up Photoshop. Yeah, that was under Windows tools. Yeah. Now, the other thing I want to point out, I'm going to show you a couple of menus here. I'm going to say show all menu items. So when you first get Photoshop, it's going to have all of these menu items here. But what I've done is I've customized it so I don't have a lot of extraneous things that I never use on here. And you can do this on all your menus. I'll go to the view menu, show all menus. See how much more stuff shows up here? But then if I go back to Windows, you can see I've cut out a whole bunch of stuff. So what you can do, you go back to your edit menu, and keyboard shortcuts, menus, and toolbars are all places where you can customize Photoshop to take out or add menu items. So if I go like to File and I don't want to see something, let's say I'll just say Close All, and I click that. Well, let's see. Let me back up for a second. All right, so File menu, right now, it has a spot here for Close All right here. I'm running over it with my cursor. But if I go here and I go Menus, File, where is it? Close All, and I take that little eye off, watch what happens now. Now you don't see it. It was down here, close, but Close All is gone. So you can customize Photoshop and greatly reduce the things on your menus and your toolbar that you don't use. And I recommend you do it. All right, so I'm finished talking about the setup. And now we're going to go and look at the different menus. Now, in the handout that I prepared, what you've seen are my customized menus where I've taken out the extraneous things that I don't think you generally are going to need to use. And like I said, if you get rid of something that you want it back, you can always go up back here to menus and I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, well, I want Close All back. I'm going to go that, boom. I put the eye back on and now it's going to appear. Or I can go here and say, show all menu items, and everything back appears. So when you customize it, you haven't lost anything. You can always get them back. You can always see them by clicking all of that. So now what we'll do is we're going to go through the different menus, and I'm going to show you kind of the things that I think that you're going to generally use. So first off, new is to create a new document. So if I want a new blank document, I just say create, and that gives me a new blank document. So new is pretty much always going to be a blank document. And over here in this section of new, you can change things, you can make it whatever you want and create a custom new menu. So I'll just say create, whatever you want there. So new is going to create a new document, a blank page. Open is you can open pictures from open. So you can open JPEGs, you can open camera raw files, you can open PSD Photoshop files, whatever you've got, you can open them here. Open as, I don't think you'll ever need. I don't know why I kept that on there. I wouldn't worry about it. I'd take it off. Open recent is going to open your recent files. So I've got a whole list of files that I worked on, and I could open any of these from the open recent. Let me open a file just so we have something to close. All right, so close obviously is going to close that open file. If you had more than one file open, Close All would close all of them.
Mike, I have one question. This is Ruth. Are Lightroom photos in there also?
I would think, to be honest with you, I don't use Lightroom. I don't see why they wouldn't be. If
Okay.
you were to go open and then navigate to wherever your Lightroom folder is,
Mhm.
I believe you would be able to open a Lightroom photo because they're
Great.
going to, you know,
Okay,
okay.
great, thanks.
There's another question here. Hold on, folks.
Open recent, why did it go down on that corner?
Okay, so Jerry opened a file on his laptop, and instead of being in the middle of the screen, it went down in the corner. And he's asking me why, and I don't really know. Do you have scroll bars that you can move it? Yeah, I don't have an answer, and I can't demonstrate what he's showing me. But you know what? Yeah, well, you could go to you could try going to View, go to Screen Mode, and click Standard Screen Mode. See if that.
The workspace is a certain dimension of pixels, and this is then smaller than that. Is this pop?
Okay. Okay, well, sorry, Jerry, I can't help. Okay, so we've got a couple of things here for save. So save is going to save your file under the same file name that it has. Save as is going to allows you to rename it. And now let's take a look. And you get a whole bunch more options of the type of file that you can save it as. And save as a copy, you can also gives you a bunch of options as the file type. So, I'm thinking we're working on photos, so there's only a couple of file types that you're going to use. JPEG, PSD, Photoshop right here, Photoshop PSD. The large document format, if you have a huge Photoshop file, you're going to have to use that, and it'll warn you when the file's too big to save as a PSD. And then the only other one is a TIFF. I don't recommend saving as TIFF files, but if you had some special reason for doing that, you could save it as a TIFF. So basically, you're only going to save them in those three file formats: JPEG, PSD, or in some circumstances, a TIFF.
Can I stop for 1 second? I figured it out. Down at the very bottom, there's two like overlapping files. If you click on that, it puts it in the middle.
Oh, okay.
So I know what that's called.
Jerry figured out is what to do. Okay, then export. You could say, see, now it's going to say quick export as JPEG because I changed that. I changed it to JPEG, and it will save your file as a JPEG. It'll change the color profile to sRGB like we set back there, and it'll allow you to save your file, change your file name at that point. So when you're going to submit a photo to the Camera Club for the monthly, photo call, you could use export. All right, so automate is not something that a beginning Photoshop user is going to basically use. Really quick, what I'll do is I'm going to show you the basic use for automate. There's several things, but if we go photo merge, and I'm going to let it do an auto photo merge. I'm going to browse. I'll show you here. We're going to do I'm picking 4 files. It brought them up here. I'm going to click all these items here. And what it's going to do is it's going to go through these 4 files and it's going to create a panoramic. So we're going to give it a second or two, but that's what automate, that's kind of one of the basic features of automate, is to make panoramic photos. And it does a pretty good job of stitching them together. Oops. So you can see it went from if I start clicking these off, darn it. If I start clicking these eyes off here on the different layers, yep, spot. You can see the different photos that it stitched together. So it, kind of more than a basic beginning Photoshop thing, but just something that you might want to play with, automate. Let me open a file again. Another useful feature here is this file information. And in here, I can type down a description like of where I took the photo or, anything special. If I'm going to put it on the web, I might want to put keywords here. If I want to copyright it, I can copyright it. Whatever, I can put a file name up here. So you can add a lot of information to your photo files. And I personally find this very useful, maybe not when I'm doing it, but a year later when I'm looking for something or whatever, very useful, because if I go into Adobe Bridge, I can search on these keywords and, find that file. So a kind of a useful feature to use. And then print, if you're going to print a picture, you're going to hit the print button. That's a whole kind of session by itself. So I'm not going to go into that, other than that's the function of print. And then exit would be to close Photoshop. Well, I don't need to close it now. So I'm just going to close this file that I've been working on. So now I'm going to move over to the edit menu. And once again, we're going to open a file. All right, so let's just take a look at a couple of things. Undo and redo at the very top. Well, let me do a function here. Let me do something to it. Do like that. And now I can undo brush tool. So I say undo, boom, it's gone. And redo, it puts it back. So that's what the function of those two things are. It undoes one operation at a time. Whatever your last thing that you did to Photoshop, it undoes it. Cut, copy, and paste. I'm going to make a selection here. You probably can't see that. I'll say cut, and it takes it out. If I say copy, it's going to copy it. And then I'm going to move my cursor over here and say paste. And you can see over here, it has pasted that up over here. So cut, copy, and paste, pretty much the same as when you use a Word document.
Can you paste, like what you just did there? You just can open a new blank and paste that to get like a copy of what you...
Yeah, so the question was, can I open a blank file, and tell me if I'm getting your question wrong, and can I paste that here? Yep, see? Well, that was my initial selection. That's all. I just made a really rough selection. Yeah, and we'll get into pasting a little bit later. So let me close that. All right, now let's look at something else. Fill. I'm going to make a selection here, and I'll go over selections in a bit. So you're not going to be able to really see it too well, but I've selected this area here, and if I go fill, there's two fills. Up here, I can fill it with color. Okay. I can fill it with color. I can go content aware fill. And what it's going to do, it's going to fill it from something close by. Or I can go here and use this content aware fill. And it's going to say, where do you want to fill it from? And I can select where I want to fill it from and then say, okay. So a couple of different ways to, fill an area that doesn't have anything in it. All right, that's fill. Sky replacement. Let's go look at sky replacement. So open up another file. Oops, I don't need Word. I'll open this file, and I'm going to say, it's got a pretty bland sky, but if I say sky replacement, all right, you see what it does? And then I can play with that sky replacement here. So if you're thinking about sky replacement, that's what sky replacement does. So there was the original, and there's with the replaced sky.
And does this did you choose that sky? Or?
That was in the software. So let's do it again. Sky replacement. You know, it's just what Photoshop came up with. I don't really use sky replacement, so I can't answer too much questions about it other than I want to show you where you find it.
Okay.
And you know, any of this stuff, if you want to get more, you just search on Google Photoshop sky replacement, and there'll be YouTube videos that'll give you a lot more information than I'm giving you here. I'm just giving you a basic rundown of what these menu items do.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Define brush presets we'll get into later. Purge. If your Photoshop starts slowing down while you're working on it, you might say purge all, or purge histories, or purge clipboard. So, you know, I did that move, or that cut and paste. So, you know, sometimes if things slow down, remember this purge, and you could just purge all, and it will clear up some of that clutter and space that you need back. Color settings, assign profile. All right, so if I have a color settings, that's what we've already done when we initially set up Photoshop. Assign profile. So this lets me assign a profile to a picture that might be missing one. So I could pick any profile I want. I'll pick that, and it's changed the color profile. Convert to profile is another way. So it's telling me my source is Adobe RGB, the destination, and again, I can change the destination. I'll make it Photo Pro just for fun. And these changes the color profiles of your pictures. So probably not something you're going to use a lot, but it's good to know because it's a tool that you can use from time to time. All right, now we're going to go to the image menu. In first mode, you have several modes up here. You know, grayscale, it's going to want to tell you, hey, I want to do away with all the color information. It makes it a black and white, not a very good one. There's better ways to make black and whites, but you could get an initial idea of what your black and white's going to look like. Most of the time, you're going to have RGB color checked, and you know, whatever bit depth you opened that photo in Camera Raw. Adjustments. So there's a bunch of different adjustments, and there's a bunch of different ways to use them. Okay, so brightness. And when you make adjustments from here, I want to show you something. Over here, if you can see my cursor, it says layers. I just have the background layer, and I've just made an adjustment, and it's on the background layer. So this is called destructive editing. So if you use these adjustments from right here, you are changing your background layer, something I do not recommend. And I'm going to show you a little bit later how to avoid doing that. There's other places where you can get these adjustments, and we're going to go into that. The point is you've got all of these different adjustments, and you're going to be able to do them in several different spots. So I'm going to go back to open. And that's another thing on history. See, this is why I keep my history. If I go back, let's go look at the history. So I go back here to this adjustment, and I say undo. Well, actually, that's not going to work. I'm going to crop it. I'm going to crop it. Now, if I go back to undo, it only undoes one step, but I can use my history to go back as many steps as I want. So history to me is very valuable because you can go back as far as you want, as far as you have history items, and you can also expand this history folder. And the default number of states that Photoshop gives you is 50 states of history. Doubt that many of us are going to use that many history states working on a photo, but you never know. So we also have auto tone. You can barely see the difference. That's before, that's after auto tone. I'll go back to before. You have auto contrast. Again, very little change you'll see in this particular photo. Auto color, again, You can kind of see the color shift, but it's kind of mild. So these are some quick and dirty, really easy things you can do. But Photoshop is much more powerful than those. Okay, we're going to go to image size. So this is something that's pretty good to know. Let me see if I can drag this down here. Give me a second, please. Okay, there's a couple things that you want to keep track of here. One is your image size up here. I'm kind of looking at this at an angle, so it's a little hard for me to see everything. The other thing is the size of your photo and the resolution of your photo, and you have this resample button here. So right now I'm going to check the resample button, and I'm going to change the width of the photo to 8. So look what happens. It changes the image size. It increases it. It kept the resolution the same, but it changed the height and the width of the photo. That's with resamples checked. So I'm cancel that. And we're going to go back to image size. Now it's unchecked. Now what happens? So this is 5.01 megabytes. Now what happens? Watch what happens. I'm going to change it to 8. And it also changed the resolution. Generally, you do not want that to happen. You do not want the resolution to change. So just keep in mind this resample button does a lot of different things here. And you got to be careful when you're changing the size of your photos to keep an eye on this, that your resolution changes. Just make sure you're changing what you want to change. Okay, then the other thing we're going to do is canvas size. So canvas size is a little different. So in canvas size, it's telling me what the width of my photo is and the height. And I can change that. Let's say I want the height to be 3 inches. And you see this little thing here? Now watch what happens. I'm going to make it even more. I'm going to make it 2 inches. And it's going to take from the top and the bottom. All right. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to canvas size. I'm going to go 2 inches again. But this time I'm going to anchor at the bottom. So now it's only going to take from the top. All right. Canvas size, I'm going to make it 2 inches. And I'm going to anchor it at the top. And now it takes from the bottom. So this is a way you can kind of crop your photos. Or let's just say I want to make this a 3x5. So I'm going to go 3. Oh, wait, that's image size. Excuse me. Wrong thing. I'm going to go canvas size 3 by 5, and it's going to crop from all over and make a 3x5 photo.
Canvas size 4.
So Mike,
okay, hang on 1 second. I've got a question from somebody in the room, and then I'll get to yours.
okay.
So the question was, what is canvas size for? A lot of times what I use it for is if I'm going to do let's just say that I wanted this photo to be a little larger. So I'm going to say 6 inches wide. Okay, so now it's going to add on the sides, right? So here's what I could do. I could go, I'm going to select this size here, this side. I'm selecting the left side, and I'm going to say fill, and I'm going to have it content aware. And it's going to make my photo bigger. And then I'll select this side and I'll say fill, content aware. All right. So, oops. So you see what it did? So here's my original photo. I added the canvas and I added to the sides. So if you're going to do a gallery wrap photo and you want to wrap around the edges, but you don't want to lose, let's say this is the face of my original photo here, right? I'm going to wrap around the edges. So I'm going to add, this is going to be the wrapped part. And maybe I fill it like I did with the photo, or maybe I just say fill with color. And I'm going to want to make it black because I want, oops, Uh-oh, I didn't select first. That's the problem. I didn't select. So now I just selected it and I'm going to go edit, fill, color, black. Okay. And now it filled it with black. So that's, probably for myself, that's what I use it for the most is doing a gallery wrap edge. Okay. So there was a question from the Zoom folks. What was the question?
I get confused between canvas size, print size, and the size I want to print. So let's say this is a 5x7 or a 3x5 that you're working with, but you really want to print it in a larger format. Does that matter or?
Well, yeah, I mean, okay, let's just say, so this photo here, I'm going to go to image size. So this photo is 3.6 by 5.4. So every time you make it bigger, you're going to lose some resolution. So let's just say I wanted to make it a 5x7. So I don't want to change the resolution 300. And you see my these are my pixel dimensions.
Okay.
So I'm going to go, I'm going to make it 5. Okay, so it's going to make it 5 by 7.5. So first off, you see what happened? It's going to add pixels to it because I'm making it bigger. And also you've got this drop down here that gives you a bunch of different choices of what to select. And because I'm making it bigger, I'm going to say preserve details for enlargement. Okay, so now I'm making it 5 by 7. Okay, so I'm enlarging it. Okay, so now it's larger, but it's too large. It's 5 by 7.5, right? It's 5 by 7.5 instead of 5 by 7. So now I'm going to just go to canvas size and I'm going to make it a 5 by 7. I'm going to crop off some of the stuff from the edges. You see how I did that? So I used both image size and canvas size to make it a 5 by 7 because that's what I want printed. Does that answer your question or no?
Well, sort of. I mean, let's say I start with file new or whatever it is, and I select a photo to import. Let's say it's a big image and I want to print, an 11 by 14 or something. I don't want to lose the detail when I import it into Photoshop.
So, well, let me ask the question, how big was the image out of your camera and after you processed it?
I don't know what you mean by after I processed it. I do nothing with it in the way of processing until it goes into Photoshop.
Okay, so you've done nothing. So okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to close this one. Oops.
Let's say it's just for a number. It's 20 megapixels.
Okay, so that's going to be a pretty good size photo. I'm going to go to my camera raw file here. I'm going to open this image. All right, I'm not going to make any adjustments to it. I'm just going to open it. And so this is a raw image, and this one is 18 by 27. So you wanted to make an 11 by 14. So now I'm going to go image size. I'm going to change enlargement to bicubic sharper for reduction, and I'm going to go down to 11. So now I've got an 11 by 16. So yeah, I don't know if I'm addressing your question or not. If you don't want to lose detail,
I think you are. I mean, it's you want to have it the size you want it to print at the time you import it.
Correct. Well, yeah, or so you've seen me take a larger image and make it smaller. And again, if I wanted to make it an 11 by 14, I would go to canvas size. Well, I'll probably take stuff off the bottom on this one. And I would go like that. And it would take, now I've got an 11 by 14, but I haven't lost any detail because I haven't made it larger. I've made it smaller. And when you make it smaller, you're not going to lose detail.
Right.
You'll possibly lose detail when you make it larger. And I'm kind of getting off track here a little bit, but let me just say this. If you want to make, there's something called stair stepping. If you want to make a photo larger, let's say the original photo here was 11 by 16. Stair stepping means let's say I wanted to make it the width 20 inches. Well, I could change that to 20. So I'm going from 11 to 20. So that's a big jump. But with stair stepping, I'm going to just do it in increments. I'm going to make it 13. I'm going to add 13. Then I'm going to make it, well, let me change this reduction. We want to go enlargement. And then I'm going to go 15. Oops, 15. So I'm going to stair step it up. So if you stair step it, theoretically, you're not going to lose as much detail by just going up in increments instead of making that massive, from 11 to 20 jump. And I've done this a number of times, and really, you get pretty darn good images by stair stepping it. So going from a large image to a smaller one, you're not losing detail. Going from a small image to a large one, you are going to lose some detail. But if you're going to do that, again, think about that stair stepping process.
I'll just ask one question related to this.
Okay.
You have to use something that's going to go to the camera club, and you've got your picture. You take a little piece out. You say, I don't want that little piece. Now the problem is when you try to blow that up to camera club size, then you lose the details, right?
Okay, right. So the question was, so I'm going to take an image. Let's go with, I will go with one of these. All right, so now I want to submit. I'm going, boy, I really like just this section here. I'm going to submit this to the camera club. Actually, I guess I should crop it more than, I'm going to do that. Okay, so I'm going to crop it. So now I've got that little section. But depending on how much you take out, you could lose all kind of detail. So, yeah, you will lose detail. Well, one thing you could do, well, let's just see from what the original image was. These are already small to begin with. Okay, so, and actually, if you want to find out how many pixels right here, see, I'm telling you my width in inches. I can just change this to pixels, and now it tells me my pixels. So, so now I see I don't really have a lot of pixels to play with because the height, is 1090, right? So I if I just take this, if I crop out this little section here, and now I look at the pixels of this little section, going to change it to pixels. The height is 122 pixels. So I've lost all kinds of detail, and there's no sense in submitting it to the camera club. Yeah. So if you're going to do that, don't crop too much out of your photo. Okay. All right. So we're going to, I'm going to close this, and I can close it right here, and we're going to move on. So we were an image. We've gone through the image size. Okay. Another thing we should do is open recent. Still on image. You've got image rotation. I can rotate it 180 degrees or whatever. So let's just say my I can go arbitrary. So if my horizon's not really where I want it, I can use this and go either clockwise or counterclockwise and rotate that image a little bit. All right. All right, layers. Now, I talked a little earlier about destructive editing, where I'm doing my work on my background layer. And then if I save it, my background layer's changed, and I'll never get back to the original photo. So layers is something you really want to learn how to use. Now let's take a look at layers. So what layers does, I'm just going to create a duplicate layer, and it says background copy, but I can change the name of that if I want to. All right, now I've got two layers here. And let's say I go in and where's my brush tool? I'll just go like that. So that's just going to be, watch what happens when I click this eye off of the additional layer. You don't see that because my original layer, my background layer, is unchanged. I've made the change on the copy of that layer. So remember when we looked at the adjustments over here? If we go here and we pick new adjustment layer, we have all of those same adjustments over here, but now they are a layer. So I can go whoops and make it, that's added a new layer. So this is non-destructive editing, and this is what you should be striving to do when you use Photoshop. Another thing now, you see I've got this crazy layer with that. I can take it and I can get rid of it. I've dragged it down, I've selected it, and I dragged it down to the little trash can down here, and now it's gone. So you see the difference? So you really want to get used to these kind of adjustments. And I'm going to go over the adjustments more in a little bit, but right now we're just looking at the different menu options. So if you look, I've got a couple of layers over here, and I've got merge down. So if I merge down, you see that it's merged that layer down. I could also go merge visible. It's merged it down. Most cases, you're going to want to say flatten image. If you're going to save it to a JPEG, you're going to flatten it first and then save it as a JPEG. What I recommend is when you add layers to your files, to your photos, you save them as Photoshop documents, as PSD documents, because that's going to save your original and all your layers. So what I'm going to demonstrate now is I'm going to go over here. I'm going to pick, I only have one Photoshop document for this session. All right, so you see all of these layers over here. You can see the layers that I have. I'm going to click all the eyes off. We go back to the original image, and then here's the changes that I've made to it in the layers. But I've saved it as a PSD, so now I have all of these, plus if I get all those gone, I have my background, the original picture. So layers are a very, very powerful tool in Photoshop. And to me, one of the primary reasons you want to use Photoshop is to take advantage of the layers. Type, this is for graphics. Don't worry about type. You're not going to use it. Select. All right. Selection tools are very, very important tools to know. Okay. We're going to go back to this photo. So let's look at some of the selection items. I can go select color range, and I've got my cursor here, and I can click here. I don't know if you can see on the screen as I'm clicking around, it's selecting different parts of the photo. And then with my slider here, I can either select more things in that color range or less things. So this is a tool that you're going to want to do. I don't know if you can see these, what we'll call marching ants over here. That's my selection. You can't really tell. All right. So that's color range. Focus area. Again, I'm going to click. I'm going to say, click on your focus area. Yep. I've never really used this, so sorry. Yep, something's gone screwy here. Boy, it's locked up. Okay, now it's gone. I don't know what happened there. Anyway, it's supposed to select the area of your photo that's in focus, and maybe nothing's in focus in this one. I don't know. Subject. This isn't a good photo to do subject. I'm gonna go. All right, so if I say select, so select subject. So everybody knows what the subject of this photo is. The subject, it's working. You see my spinning wheel? And I don't know if you can see the marching ants around the bird here, or if I go like this, you can see what parts of the photo it selected as the subject. Well, this part over here isn't part of the subject, so we're going to go over how to get rid of that layer later. But right now, we're just going through the different ways to select things from the select menu. I could select sky. Well, this isn't a very good photo to do sky. Okay, so the bird's in red, which means the bird is masked, which means it's not part of the sky. So now that I've got the sky selected, I could go over here to my adjustments. Yeah, this thing got screwy. And I could so this will just adjust the sky and not the bird. See? Power of selections. So that's select sky is probably something you're going to use on a picture like this more. Select sky. And you'll see it in just a second here. It's going to select the sky, and it does a pretty darn good job of doing that. So I don't know if you can see the marching ants. I'm going to click over here. The parts in red have been masked. They are not selected. And we'll go up to our adjustments, and I'll just for fun, we're just going to go, and you can see now it's just the sky is selected. So the sky selection tools, all really cool. Select and mask. Okay, we're going to go back here to select sky. And if I say select and mask, okay, pretty much it's showing you what I showed you earlier, and you can make adjustments over here to whatever you're doing. Cancel that. All right, I'm going to make a smaller selection. I'm going to use my lasso tool to select this mountain here, and then I'll say select, modify, border smooth. I'll say expand, and it asks me how many pixels. Let's go 777 pixels. Too many. 70 pixels. Oops. See how it expanded that? So if you can make a selection and you want more of that type of selection, probably color range is probably a better way to do it. So if I select color range like that, and then I say modify, expand, it just selects more pixels that are in that same color range. Modify, contract, it would contract it by, you can see the difference, right? So there was my original selection, and then I said select less, and there you go. So modify, feather's kind of a fun one. So I'm going to go back and I'll select something here, and we're going to look at it here, and then I'm going to feather it. And I'll feather it, let's say 20 pixels for fun. And it's made a slight change in it. So what you should see here is how it softened these edges. So I'm going to go back up here. This was my original selection. You see how sharp those edges are? Now, when I feathered it, you see the difference. Unfeathered, feathered. So feathering is a pretty cool tool to use, especially if I'm going to make an adjustment and I don't want the adjustment to, I'll show you. What the heck? We're going to go. Okay, so that's my initial selection. Curves, I'm going to make the selection like that, and I'll go dark. Okay, so that's my selection like that. I don't know what I'm trying to just demonstrate to you here, is that that's a sharp thing, but if I feather it, modify, feather, and then I go back to curves, you should see that it's just softer around the edges. So it's a good tool to know to use feather, so you don't get a really sharp delineation between your selection and the area around your selection. So just something good to know how to use. And we'll go grow. Obviously, is going to grow the selection. Similar, again, it's going to select similar things as what your selection is. I don't really use those too much, but selection tools are really valuable. Save selection. So I'm going to save it, and I can name it here. So I give it a name, and then I deselect it. So to deselect, you could say it's right here, deselect. Well, let me go back up. I've selected it, and I say deselect, it's unselected. Now, later on, when I'm working on these photos, if I want to, I could say load selection, and there it is. And I can load it and work on it later. So typically when I'm working on my photos, I make all my selections first. I'll select the sky. I'll save that selection. I might, make a selection of these rocks over here, save that selection, whatever it is, I try to make all my selections first, and then I work on them. So just a little kind of tip. All right, filters. These are something you're might want to use. Let's see what I can find to work on. Adaptive wide angle. Probably, you can see the effect that it's going to have. If you take a wide angle shot and you want to play with it, you can use that. Not something you're going to use, I don't think, too often. Camera raw filter. So this would open your photo back up in camera raw and let you use the camera raw options here to do whatever you wanted to do with it. Typically what I might do is I go, oh, geez, I've been working on this photo, and well, let's see, I'm going to give you a real life example here. No, let's see, cancel. Let's get rid of this. And wait, we're running out of time. I'm opening up this wrong stuff. Let's say open this and you can see my horizon's not correct. I mean, there's a couple of ways I could do it. I could go to my crop tool and you see the grid lines, and I can eyeball it and rotate it like that. Or I could go back to filter, camera raw filter. It's going to open it in camera raw in just a second. And I could go down to geometry here and use camera raw to, it should be changing it. Well, that didn't work. Oh, actually it did work. So you see the difference? So I could use it for that or whatever I wanted to use it for. The other filters that you might use are blur or sharpen, but not very often. Now sharpen, we're going to, if we have time, we're going to cover that later. A good tool to use is the Smart Sharpen filter. God, I'm running out of time here, folks. I apologize. The view menu, couple things to know. If you get some kind of see how the screen changed, it really is kind of hard to look at. So a lot of times screen mode, I just use standard screen mode. If something goes screwy, just remember to go to the view menu and try to pick standard screen mode. It's probably the most useful one. You've got zoom in, view, zoom out. I mean, pretty self-explanatory. The Windows menu, again, they have all your tools here. You can click on them or off them. In your handout, I've got the ones that I think you're going to use the most often. Now we're going to go over to the toolbar. This is the Move tool. You saw me use it earlier. I'm going to make a selection. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it, and then I can move it. So you can see I'm moving it around. So if you're going to like move a face from one picture to another, you would select the face, say copy, paste it into your new selection, and then use the Move tool to put it wherever you wanted it. This is the rectangle tool. It will select a rectangle. So I'm going to go down and there, see, it's selected that. The lasso tool is a very important tool to use. I use it a lot, to make a selection. It's the quickest selection tool there is. If I want to make a rough selection like that, and now I've selected the water. So the lasso tool, just keep in mind that it's the fastest tool to select or deselect something. I'm going to go back up. I'm going to say select sky. I'll show you what I'm talking about here. Okay, so now it's selected the sky. I'm going to click down here to see what's selected. So you can see here that this part down here has not been selected. I can use my lasso tool, and if I click here, it's going to add to the selection. See how it's added? Or if I click over here, it can subtract from the selection. So this is the add, this is the subtract, this is the general selection. These tools here, the 3 selection tools, you should know them. They're very important. You can use them. The object selection tool, I'm going to select this. I'm going to just outline this cloud. And it's working on selecting it for me. Working slowly on selecting it for me. Yeah, I apologize. I don't know why it's taking so long. Let's cancel that and get another picture that's going to do a better, quicker job. Boy, I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm going to close Photoshop. Come on.
Yeah.
Well, it's still working on it. This thing is really jammed up on me. I apologize. All right. All right, so it selected the whole sky rather than just that cloud. Not probably, actually it did select the cloud. So the object selection tool, good tool to know. I'm right-clicking to get the quick selection tool. Another tool you can use to select. The magic wand tool is going to select here. And again, this adds here. Up here, you can see my cursor. That adds to your selection. This one next to it subtracts. Those are really the only 2 that you need to worry about. Okay, so selection tools. This is a, oh, by the way, the tooltips. Let's go to Edit, Preferences, General. Tools. And if I want to, if I click on Show Rich Tooltips and say OK, when I click on these, or I scroll over them, you see how it gives me an explanation of what they are? And if you don't like that, you just take that off. Okay, so in your handout, I've got a page that tells you what all of these tooltips are, and I'm running out of time and I apologize. So I don't want to spend more time on that. I think what I would like to do now is talk about editing photos. So let's go ahead.
Mike, before you go, there was a question. Did Ruth ask you what selection tool you would use for a face?
Okay, the question, what selection tool I would use for a face? Let's get a face here. I've got my dog. I would use, you could use, let's try them all. We'll use object selection tool. And I'm just going to outline Cody's face. Of course, this one seems to take a lot of time right now doing it this way. I would use the object selection tool. Okay, so you see how it did that? So it did a pretty good job. And if I'm going to use Control-C to copy. And I'm going to paste it. And now I'm going to use my move tool. And now I've moved Cody's face. Yeah. So that was with the object selection tool. I could also use, the other one I would use is the quick selection tool. And now, if I go down here, you can see it selected that board and not all of his face. So I have the plus here. I'm going to select a little bit more of his face. I'm going to hit the minus and deselect this board. And now I'll say Control-C and Control-V, do the copy and a paste. And again, it selected his face. If I wanted to select the whole dog, I would say subject selection tool up here. And it would probably do a pretty good job of selecting the whole dog. Okay. So for a face, either the object selection tool or the quick selection tool. All right. So while we're here, let's do a couple of adjustments because those are really critical to adjusting photos. So like if I look at Cody here, I'm going to go back and I'm going to say select color range and click on the black, because to me, I'm going to go and, now you can see it's selected boards too, and I don't want those, but in the sake of time, I'm going to leave it. And I'm going to select my adjustment layer, and I use curves a lot, and I'm going to say, I want to rename it black. Now it's selected, and I'm going to go to my layer adjustment tool, select curves. That's levels. Well, I can use levels, doesn't matter. And I'm going to raise this. Oh, what happened here? It's okay. Not a very good selection. So I'm going to go back. Sorry, folks. I'm going to go back and I'm just going to select using the quick selection tool. I'll say plus, and I'm going to select just the black part of his face. And I'm going to go back up to my layer adjustment. And I'm going to select curves. I could have renamed it. I didn't, for the sake of time. Watch what happens when I bring it up. You see the difference? So I can bring it up. I can bring it up as much as I want, but it doesn't look real. So I'm going to bring it up to about there. Now, another thing you can do with layers. Okay, so now you can see the before and the after. Another thing to think about over here is where it says opacity. You can make a further adjustment. Let's say I go, I'm going to bring it down just a little bit. So it's like two ways to make that adjustment. So there's that. And then there's that. So you can, that's a good thing to know how to do. I mean, and I use that a lot because you're making basically two adjustments and you're fine tuning your adjustment. Okay. Another thing you can do, I'm going to go like, I've got Cody's, the dark part of his face. I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to sharpen it. So to sharpen it, I'm going to flatten him. Yeah, I got to select it again. Darn it. I'm just going to take his face. I'm going to go to sharpen. I'm going to go to smart sharpen. And this is the one I recommend you use. And then you can sharpen it here. So if I sharpen it, you sharpen it too much. Yeah, maybe you can't see it too well, but here's the before and here's the after. So one of the other things you might want to do is when you sharpen is make a duplicate layer. And now if I go back, I'm going to sharpen it again, really way too much. All right, so it's way too much. So then I can go again to my opacity and I can kind of bring it down this way until, it's more reasonable. So just another little trick to know is to make a duplicate layer. There's before, after, and yeah. All right, so okay, I think we're out of time. I'm willing to go on as long as anybody wants. There's a whole lot I didn't get to cover with you, and I apologize. I think the main things I'd like you to take away from this are setting up Photoshop initially and using the handout that I gave you to see which tools are the most important for a beginning Photoshop user, and then becoming familiar with your selection tools and your selection adjustments using the layers. So if I go to Windows and I say adjustments, it's going to bring those same adjustments over here, and I can make them, I can have them as a panel or a tab over here. So to close, let's say I have my adjustment tab over here and I don't want to see it anymore. I can click it off here, or I can go adjustments and then click this and it says close tab group or close tab, and I can get off from there. The adjustments, selections and adjustments are your best friend in Photoshop. Learning how to make selections, looking at your photos and realizing what do you want to adjust on that photo, selecting that part, and then using one of your adjustment tools to select it. And in your handout, I have which adjustment tools, I think I say, a good one, better, and best, or something like that. Really, the two that are the main ones you want to use are levels and curves. Curves gives you more control, and I would recommend you try to learn how to use curves. But level, you can also use levels or use them both, but they do basically the same thing. Curves gives you more control over your adjustment, though. Am I out of time? 2:30?
That's the scheduled time.
Okay, so did anybody have questions? Did I not cover something that somebody wants to see?
Glad this is in English, otherwise I might have gotten lost.
Yeah, so, I know I covered a lot and I didn't cover a lot. This will be recorded. You can go back over it. You've got the handout. It's got a lot of information in there. I try to include just what I think beginning Photoshop users would need to know. Keep in mind, again, I'm going to stress learning how to make selections, learning how to make adjustments on those selections, and developing a workflow for when you work on photos. So I mentioned mine is to make my selections first and then make my adjustments. The last step that I would recommend in doing your photos, especially if you're going to submit them for the Camera Club, is if you're saving files as PSDs with layers, is to flatten those images. Then make a duplicate layer, do your sharpening as the last step, and then, or actually resizing the photo and then doing your sharpening, and then saving it as a JPEG to submit it. So I'm going to run through that really quick with Cody here. Where are we? We've got an adjustment layer. I'm going to flatten the image. So let's say I was going to submit this to the Camera Club. I flatten it. I'm going to go to
Flatten keeps all the layers, right?
no, flatten does not.
It does.
It does not keep the layers.
Okay.
So
you want to save it before you flatten.
Yeah, you're gonna save your photos as PSD.
Keeps all the layers.
Okay, to keep the layers. Now I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna change my inches to pixels, and the maximum height for the Camera Club is 1080. So I'm gonna change my pixels to 1080, and you can see my width is 1620. So that's within the parameters for the Camera Club. I'm gonna save it. I'm gonna make a duplicate layer. I'm going to select Cody. So I'll just select subject. It's selected Cody. I'm going to sharpen just Cody. I don't want to sharpen the fence boards. So I go to filter, sharpen, smart sharpen, and I'm just going to sharpen it 0.08 because the picture is so small, and my amount up here, I'm just going to set it at 60. So I've sharpened him a little bit. I'm going to bring it up to 100% to see if it looks okay. I mean, I wouldn't submit this picture like it is, but all right. So now I've got that, and I can either flatten it or I can go export. And if I export it, I'll say Cody. All right. So now it's asking me, do I want to save the changes that I made? I do not, because I don't want to overwrite my original file. So now we're going to look real quick, and then I'll let you guys go. Let's see where. So this is the original photo. And then I'm going to bring up the one for the Camera Club. Oh, that's not it. Where the heck did it go?
Cody, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know where it saved it. Let's see. Open recent. Let's see. I'm going to say export and see where it saved it. It saved it. It should have saved it here in picture. Oh, in pictures. Okay, it's in a different folder. All right. Open pictures, Cody. Open. Okay. So now you can see it. Well, it should have assigned a color profile. All right. So we're going to look at, here's Cody, and we look at Cody, image size, pixels, 1080, resolution 72. So this is great for submitting to the web. I'll say, okay. And I look at my original picture, image size, it's still the same 1400 it was. My resolution's 350 as it was. So I did not change my original photo, but I have the one that I'm going to submit to the camera club. So hopefully that's clear. And the steps you would take to submit a picture. All right. Any last questions? All right. Well, thank you, folks. And bye-bye.